Today we're going to talk about divorce in the Bible and Jesus' particular way of ministering with people who are divorced. So recently I preached a sermon on divorce, and that's something that we pastors are a little hesitant to preach about because it's a minefield. In the congregation you have people sitting there who are struggling in their marriages and they just need a little encouragement to hang in there. You have people who are in marriages that are dysfunctional and painful, and they're going back and being abused or hurt. And what you would say to them is different than what you would say to those who need to just hang in there. You have people who are divorced, and perhaps they initiated the divorce for reasons that you want to say, what were you thinking? And then there were other people who were divorced, and you want to say, the Lord understands, and He just cares for you. So you've got this minefield because you've got all these people, and you'd want to say something different to each one of those different categories of people. One of the things that's clear, Jesus speaks about marriage and divorce, and He says, what God has joined together, let no one separate. He's telling us that we need to really work at, we come at this as though it's a lifelong covenant. And we are committed to grow old with each other in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until we're parted by death. So that's one side of the coin. And part of what we need to remember in the way Jesus teaches this, He's pretty strict. He says, if you divorce and remarry, then you've committed adultery. We look at that and say, wow, that seems pretty harsh. Even His own disciples said, really, Jesus, is that how it works? And I just remind you, when Jesus teaches, He teaches using what we'd call a technique called prophetic hyperbole. Prophetic means it's a general statement, a blanket statement. He's not looking at all the exceptions to water it down. He's giving a very simple rule that everybody can live by. That doesn't mean there aren't exceptions to that rule. So when I think of a young woman who I knew whose husband was very dysfunctional and broken, and he would pull her by the hair and kick her. And the answer to that is Jesus does not want you to stay in a marriage where you're being physically abused. Even though He doesn't make that exception in the statement in Matthew 19, He's not making all the exceptional rules. He's saying this is the broad rule. So the other thing I remember about that when Jesus is teaching in this way, prophetic hyperbole, by the way, means that he makes a broad statement, exaggerates to make a point, and it's a blanket general statement. He does that also when He says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. We don't cut off our hand. We understand what He's saying is take this seriously. So Jesus wants to make sure that people know when you're married, you're to work hard, you're to persevere. And by the way, I think about the couples I've known who've been married more than 50 years. And every single one of them that I've spoken to, I interviewed a number of them a few years ago, and I said, what does it take to stay married more than 50 years? The number one answer, perseverance. You don't give up. Often people will go through a season, maybe a year or two, that's difficult or hard. They persevere through that. 5 years later, I find the same couple happily married, and they were grateful that they worked through that. So that's the general rule. But we also recognize when Jesus is speaking about divorce, He's speaking at a time where only men could divorce women. They could send them away for any reason. There was no child support, no alimony, no half of the property given to them, and the children stayed with the husband because the children were considered property of the husband. In that context, Jesus is really clear. This is not the way men are supposed to treat their wives. But when we come to how does Jesus actually minister to and respond to somebody who's divorced, we come to John chapter 4. And Jesus waits at a well for a woman who comes there. She's been married and divorced 5 times, and now she's living with a man. She's been rejected 5 times. She's been hurt, and her heart has been broken 5 times. Jesus meets her there, and He doesn't say to her, you know what, if you'll go through an annulment process, I'll share with you living water. He doesn't say, if you'll go ahead and get married, then once you do, I'll share with you living water. He doesn't say, go ahead and tell me all the things you did wrong, and let me judge you for those things, and then I'll give you living water. He says to this woman, if you knew who you were talking to, I would give you living water, and you would never thirst again. And He's talking about the kind of life He gives us here, this thing that we thirst for, of being loved and accepted, and grace and mercy shown to us, and being told that we have value and worth. And that's what Jesus did for a woman who'd been married and divorced 5 times and was now living with a man. And that's how He looks at you. No matter what it is that you've done in your life, He looks at you and He sees you as someone He dearly loves, and He wants to redeem, restore, and repurpose you. And by the way, that woman became Jesus' first missionary to the Samaritans. And John tells us that many Samaritans believed because of her testimony.